know, for each of the speaker, I have a dilemma, like whether I should stop, but I would like to listen more. So, yeah, probably we probably will stretch the time a little bit, and we will have the fourth speaker, Pak Greg. So Pak Greg, as we all know, has been has been writing a lot about political Islam in Indonesia. And also probably the question that we can address tonight to Pak Greg is, how do you see the trends and challenges in contemporary study of Muslim politics and the place of studies of Indonesia there in the scheme? And I don't know, probably you would like to touch a little bit upon the issue on Nahdlatul Ulama lately. I know it has provoked some debates, but I don't know whether it actually will change the trend of the study of Islamic mass Muslim organization in Indonesia. Silahkan, Pak.
Terima kasih, Bu Fatima. It goes without saying that we have a great deal of valuable research done by political science departments and Islamic studies departments across Indonesia on a great many aspects of political life of Muslims, particularly empirical studies and very rich descriptive studies, things that tell us what happened, who was involved in them at particular times, and we're all much better off because of the care and the diligence that's been taken with that research. But what I would like to do is to suggest some areas where there are very exciting opportunities for new kinds of research and new kinds of methods that can help to explain facets of political Islam in Indonesia which until now have not been properly explored. So we'll come back to Enu at the end, but let me make a few observations. Bob has been talking about trends in, both Bob and Nelly, about trends in their disciplines in the West. In my discipline, quant is king. Quantitative studies, particularly in North America, dominates political science departments, and it's increasingly hard to find a qualitative researcher into political issues. We're getting some of this in Indonesia, but there's still lots of qualitative research being done. But that's a good thing, because quantitative research can tell us many things, can give us certainty of understanding about many things that previously we only speculated about. How many members are there in Enu or Muhammadiyah? We had figures, not very reliable, from both organisations. So it's only when we had survey data that we knew with some certainty that Enu is more than 5 times the size of Muhammadiyah. So these kinds of things may not be welcome news, but we have consistent pattern over survey data for decades now. So I'm all in favour of quantitative research. But my problem is when we have quantitative researchers who say this is the story, that we can know most of what we need to know from figures. And I think that's a mistake. And this is where qualitative research comes in, interviewing people, doing participant observation, ethnographic research, research that takes us into the minds of individual Muslims and tries to work out what makes them behave politically in the way they do. What inconsistencies are there? What lurks behind the public image that we often get when people are answering survey questions? If I give you one obvious example, we all know the literature about rising conservatism in Indonesia, growing pietisation, hijrah groups, all those Salafism, all those sorts of figures. Well, we have some researchers who are doing ethnographic research into these groups. And they find that in fact this pietism is far more fragile, perhaps hollow, than what it appears from outside. If you have a quick meeting with someone, they outwardly look very pious, the way they speak appears very pious, but if you get to know them closely, you'll find their religious life is much more complex. So what's the benefit of this for political study? If we want to project what trajectories there are in Indonesia in the future, we don't just need the surveys that give us the big numbers. We need people who are looking at the individuals that make up this research, because it might be that their pietistic trend goes down very quickly because their religious life is actually not as intense as what it seems, or they choose to express themselves religiously in another way. So we need both. And so this is really an argument for us to not only do qualitative research, but to do research which gives us depth of knowledge with people, not just understanding events and places, but what people are really looking for when they vote for parties. So that's the first thing. The second thing is there's a trend in the global study of political Islam to look beyond parties and elections and legislatures and governments and the like, to look at the broader social setting. It's not just groups, but it's also increasingly how individuals can have an influence. Individuals connected in social media, connected through associational activities, who actually put a lot of pressure on political parties and shape the way political parties behave. If we're just looking at political parties themselves, we miss that connection. An obvious example would be Aksi Islam. So 212 movement. Political parties did not play the leading role in that. It was Ormas Islam, and some of them not very big. Bakhtiar Nasir is not the head of a big organisation. Sure, they had FPI, HTI and Mada Islamiyah, which are big groups, but so many people joined the 212 demonstration not because of political parties or formal organisations, but because of social media networks, because of communal networks and things like that. So we can only understand that phenomenon that had a huge impact on government and how government managed Islam, particularly Islamism. We can only understand that if we understand the broader social setting. So it's an argument for something much broader than just looking at those things that name themselves politics. Because I think increasingly we see in studies, we look at everyday politics studies, for example. Asset Bayat, various other people have done these kinds of studies that show that grassroots informal politics has much more power than what many people assume, particularly if you're thinking politics is only about elections. So that's a second point I would make. A third point is about power connections. In effect, political Islam. If we're looking at the literature on Indonesia, we have Ferry Hadiz, who's written a couple of very illuminating studies, one of them with, or two of them with Dick Robertson. But there's hardly any other literature that I'm aware of, certainly in English, but I think also in Indonesia, very little literature on the political economy of Islam. So when political parties make decisions, so it's often said ideology is much less important now in Indonesian politics, it's about interests. Okay, people can say that, they might identify a few people. But in actual fact, the whole structure of interests is far more complex than that, and we often do not know the details. We know, for example, that Eric Thohir was one of the main financial supporters of PAN in the last election. And it's one of the reasons why PAN did very well, because they had money, they had good research, they had a really professional campaign for a party that otherwise probably should have gone down. So, in the past, Rusdi Kirana from Upper Lion Air, still on the board of PKB, but for several elections he was a major funder of PKB. So that seems an obvious connection between powerful rich people and political parties. But there's something much more complex with powerful corporations not just the individuals of the oligarchies, but the nexus of interests that surround them. All these people who have a say in politics and who want to get something from it. So there's a great deal of work that could be done to show how those economic interests shape the kind of Islamic politics that we have. Whether parties decide to pursue a more Islamist agenda, which we often see from parties that are not formally Islamic, or where they decide to take a more pluralist approach. So I think that's one area that would be also really illuminating for us. And final thing is more about political philosophy, the normative world of politics, which is increasingly neglected. Lots of terms that we use, you know, moderate, radical, progressive, conservative, they are changing. Across the world, they are changing. Where people can be progressive in one aspect of their life and increasingly socially conservative in another aspect of their life. So the labels that we use, the categories that we have that have been present and defined in a particular way for decades, may no longer be adequate to capture this growing nuance to their religious views politically. It might be they're strongly in favour of democracy, particular rights to groups, perhaps religious rights, but they are vehemently opposed to LGBT rights or the rights of particular religious minorities. So we get these what seem to be countervailing tendencies, cross tendencies, yang saling bertentangan sebenarnya. So I think much more work needs to be done about what kind of philosophical setting that people have when they make those choices. So I've yet to get the kartu merah from Bu Fatima, so let me finish with something about Inu. I'm not quite sure how to answer this. So, I mean, if we're talking about Inu as an example of what I've been talking about, everyone knows, I think, that Inu is on the verge, if it hasn't already received, was it izin usaha pengembangan? It's mining licence from the government. Inu, of course, has no background in mining. I think there's only one person on the Inu board that knows anything much about the mining sector. At the very least, this is an enormous challenge and an enormous risk for Inu, given just all the challenges of launching a mine, all the capital you need, all the technical expertise you need, in a whole lot of things, not just digging coal out of Kalimantan Timor, but all the things about environmental protections, consultation with local communities. So the risks are enormous. But yet Gus Yahya has been quoted as saying, and I quote, kami desperate for money. The Inu is so incapable of providing for the welfare of its many tens of millions of members that it's prepared to take this risk. I'm certain that among the people consulted about this risk are lots of people who have interests that lie well outside Inu, people who are hoping to make a lot of money from this process. Be wonderful, while this is happening now, if someone wanted to do research on this. It may not make you popular in Inu circles, but it's very important to do that research. So that would be one kind of example. Another thing I mentioned, everyday politics, before I mentioned associational activities. This is leaning the other way in a more favourable way to Inu, that the decisions that lots of ordinary Inu people take to engage in interfaith dialogue, to protect religious minorities, to be engaged in a wide range of political debates, whether we know there are left-wing groups in Inu that want to reconcile Marxism with Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. There's this great diversity of activism within Inu, and people are incurring risk when they do these things, when they go and give pengajian at the pesantren waria and things like that. So this wonderful, colourful mosaic that is NU. Again, getting some of the personal stories about that of people who are, in a way, Malawan arus of the mainstream. And this is such an important thing for some of the themes that others have been talking about today. And it would be great to get someone writing in depth about this, about these personal decisions that people make about how religion is going to make a difference to their society and to the nation. I think.
Thank you very much. I wasn't asked to become a discussant, so I will not discuss or make a summary. I think each of you has probably wrote something important from the four speakers. So please, if you have questions, probably first of all we have to agree like what time we should finish. Then I can adjust the questions, how many questions can be